saw this quote once that said that manipulation is when they blame you for how you react, but don't take accountability for how they treated you or made you feel. Unfortunately, some people will try to make us the worst person in the story for how we responded to what they did to us or said to us or made us feel like, and then blame us for the actions that they take next, for the steps that they take next, for the things that they do to you next, saying that it's your fault. They quickly become the victim in a problem that they created. They allow themselves to sit there and genuinely believe that you're the problem, and you have to stop responding to people that have this mindset. You have to stop giving them the power to make you feel as if you're the worst person ever because you did what was right for you, because you were justified in the actions you took, because you made sure that you were not allowed to be felt like you don't matter. Unfortunately, there are some people that desire to make you the worst person in the story because it allows them off the hook for the things that they did to you. It's a season of not letting people get away with whatever they want to get away with because they don't deserve that.
You watch it happen over and over again. The colleague who takes credit for your ideas gets the promotion. The friend who lies effortlessly has everyone wrapped around their finger. The partner who plays emotional games seems to get everything they want, while you, honest, genuine, trying to do the right thing, feel like you're constantly losing. You start to wonder if you're playing life wrong, if kindness is weakness, if honesty is stupidity, if the only way to succeed is to become someone you don't recognize in the mirror. Here's what's really happening. You're witnessing a psychological phenomenon that has confused and frustrated good people for centuries. Manipulators don't actually win. They just appear to win, and they appear to win consistently enough that it creates the illusion of a system rigged in favor of deception. But understanding why this illusion exists reveals something far more important than just calling out bad behavior. It reveals the psychological mechanisms that make manipulation temporarily effective, why certain personality types are drawn to these strategies, and most importantly, why this apparent success is always, inevitably, unsustainable. The answer isn't to become a manipulator yourself. The answer is to understand the game they're playing so well that you can protect yourself from it while building something far more valuable. Authentic power that doesn't depend on other people's psychological weakness. Why do manipulators seem to get ahead? What psychological advantages do they have in the short term? And why do most people completely misunderstand what's actually happening when they watch these dynamics play out? The truth is more complex, more hopeful, and more strategically useful than the simple narrative that bad people always win.
So your plan to keep avoiding me?
Bill,
Lordy, what exactly is it that I did to you?
you think you know what's best for me.
I am not our father.
Would have been swell if you'd realized that sooner. So glad you got to spend some time with your friends like this, Bill.
The psychology of manipulation. Success. Manipulation appears to work because it exploits fundamental psychological vulnerabilities that exist in most human minds. Understanding these vulnerabilities explains why manipulative strategies can be devastatingly effective in the short term, while remaining ultimately self-destructive. The first psychological advantage manipulators have is emotional asymmetry. While ethical people experience internal conflict when they consider deceptive or harmful strategies, manipulators often experience no such conflict. This means they can execute strategies that ethical people can't even imagine, let alone implement. When you're debating whether to take credit for someone else's work, the manipulator has already done it and moved on to the next opportunity. While you're considering whether a white lie might hurt someone's feelings, they've constructed elaborate deceptions designed to serve their goals. This asymmetry creates what appears to be a strategic advantage. The second advantage is social exploitation. Manipulators become expert readers of human psychology, not out of empathy, but out of strategic necessity. They develop sophisticated understanding of what people want to hear, what makes them feel special, what triggers their insecurities, and what promises will motivate action. This knowledge allows them to present themselves as exactly what each person needs them to be. They become human chameleons, shape-shifting their personality to match what will be most effective in each relationship. To each person they meet, they appear to be uniquely understanding, uniquely supportive, uniquely aligned with that person's values and interests. The third advantage is boundary exploitation. Most people have psychological boundaries, lines they won't cross even when crossing them might be advantageous. Manipulators either have much weaker boundaries or have learned to override their boundary responses when strategic benefits are available. This means they can access behavioral strategies that ethical people rule out automatically. They can lie when honesty would be costly. They can betray when loyalty becomes inconvenient. They can abandon when commitment becomes burdensome. This behavioral flexibility creates apparent strategic superiority. The fourth advantage is immediate feedback focus. Manipulators typically optimize for short-term gains rather than long-term consequences. This allows them to use strategies that produce immediate results, even when those strategies create future problems. While ethical people consider how their actions will affect relationships, reputation, and personal integrity over time, manipulators often focus primarily on what will get them what they want right now. This temporal myopia can create rapid apparent success. The fifth advantage is empathy immunity. Ethical people often become paralyzed by consideration of how their actions affect others. Manipulators either have reduced empathic responses or have learned to suppress empathy when it conflicts with their goals. This immunity allows them to pursue strategies that would be emotionally impossible for more empathetic people. They can fire loyal employees, betray trusting friends, or abandon family members without the psychological costs that would prevent most people from considering such actions. But here's the crucial insight. Each of these apparent advantages is also a profound limitation that creates inevitable long-term failure patterns. The same psychological traits that enable short-term manipulation success also guarantee long-term manipulation failure. The neuroscience of manipulation. Understanding what happens in manipulators' brains during deceptive behavior reveals why these strategies feel natural to them while feeling impossible to ethical people, and why the apparent success is neurologically unsustainable. Brain imaging studies of people engaging in deceptive behavior show distinct patterns of neural activity that differ significantly from truth-telling patterns. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and moral reasoning, shows increased activity during deception as the brain works harder to construct and maintain false narratives. But here's where individual differences become crucial. People with certain personality disorders show much less prefrontal activation during deception, suggesting that lying requires less cognitive effort and creates less psychological stress for them than for neurotypical individuals. This neurological difference explains why manipulation can feel effortless for some people while feeling psychologically impossible for others. Their brains simply don't generate the same stress responses to deceptive behavior that most people experience. Research on psychopathy reveals even more dramatic neurological differences. Psychopathic individuals show reduced activity in brain regions associated with empathy, guilt, and emotional bonding. This isn't a choice they're making. It's a neurological reality that makes certain manipulative strategies feel natural and consequence-free. However, neuroscience also reveals the hidden costs of chronic manipulation. Studies of pathological liars show progressive changes in brain structure over time, including decreased grey matter in regions associated with moral reasoning and increased white matter in areas associated with deception. This suggests that frequent manipulation literally rewires the brain in ways that make honest interaction more difficult, while making deceptive interaction more automatic. Manipulators may be training their brains to become less capable of authentic relationships over time. The neurological research also explains why manipulation's success is typically temporary. The cognitive load required to maintain multiple deceptive relationships eventually overwhelms even highly skilled manipulators. Their brains become exhausted from the constant work of tracking lies, managing contradictions, and suppressing empathic responses. Most importantly, neuroscience reveals that authentic relationship formation activates reward systems in ways that manipulative relationships cannot. While manipulation can provide short-term dopamine hits from successful deception, it cannot provide the deep neurochemical satisfaction that comes from genuine intimacy and trust. This means that even when manipulators achieve their short-term goals, they rarely experience the psychological fulfillment that makes success emotionally meaningful. They may win the game while losing access to the rewards that make winning worthwhile. Types of manipulation and their apparent success. Not all manipulation looks the same, and understanding different manipulative strategies helps explain why some people seem to get ahead through deceptive means, while others struggle with straightforward approaches. Emotional manipulation involves controlling others through their feelings rather than through rational persuasion. Emotional manipulators become expert at triggering guilt, fear, sympathy, or obligation in ways that motivate others to act against their own interests. This strategy appears successful because emotions often override logical decision-making, especially when people aren't aware that their emotions are being deliberately triggered. Emotional manipulators can get compliance, resources, and support by making others feel responsible for the manipulator's well-being or guilty for not meeting the manipulator's needs. The apparent success of emotional manipulation comes from its invisible nature. When someone uses logic to convince you of something, you can evaluate their arguments and disagree. When someone uses emotional manipulation, they're triggering psychological responses that feel like your own authentic feelings rather than external pressure. Social manipulation involves controlling group dynamics, information flow, and social status to create strategic advantages. Social manipulators excel at building alliances, spreading information selectively, and positioning themselves as indispensable to group functioning. This strategy appears successful because most people are unaware of how social dynamics can be engineered. While ethical people focus on contributing value to groups, Social manipulators focus on controlling how value is perceived and attributed. They become expert at taking credit for group successes while avoiding responsibility for group failures. Social manipulation often involves what psychologists call triangulation, involving third parties in conflicts or relationships to create confusion, gather information, and maintain control. By ensuring that information flows through them, social manipulators can shape how situations are understood and what actions seem reasonable. Professional manipulation involves using workplace dynamics, institutional systems, and professional relationships to advance personal interests regardless of merit or contribution. Professional manipulators excel at impression management, strategic networking, and exploiting organizational blind spots. This strategy appears successful because many professional environments reward perception as much as performance. While ethical people focus on doing good work, professional manipulators focus on ensuring their work is seen, appreciated, and rewarded regardless of its actual quality or impact. Professional manipulation often involves taking advantage of the fact that most people trust others to represent their contributions accurately. When someone claims credit for collaborative work or exaggerates their role in successful projects, colleagues often have no way to verify these claims without seeming petty or suspicious. Romantic manipulation involves using intimate relationships to gain emotional, financial, or social benefits without providing genuine reciprocity. Romantic manipulators excel at love bombing, future faking, and emotional withdrawal strategies that keep partners psychologically off balance and increasingly invested. This strategy appears successful because romantic relationships involve high emotional stakes and strong psychological vulnerabilities. When someone claims to love you while systematically exploiting your trust, the cognitive dissonance can be so severe that you rationalize their behavior rather than accepting the painful reality of manipulation. Each type of manipulation appears successful because it exploits different psychological vulnerabilities and operates in different social contexts where detection and accountability are difficult. But understanding how these strategies work reveals their fundamental limitations and inevitable failure patterns. Why manipulation seems to work. The illusion that manipulators always win comes from several cognitive biases and psychological phenomena that make manipulation success more visible while making manipulation failure less noticeable. Survivorship bias plays a crucial role in creating this illusion. You notice the manipulators who succeed in getting promotions, winning arguments, or maintaining relationships, but you don't notice the much larger number of manipulators whose strategies backfire, whose lies are discovered, or whose relationships collapse from accumulated deception. The manipulators who win are the ones who are visible to you. The ones who lose often disappear from social or professional circles, change jobs or locations, or face consequences that remove them from contexts where you would observe their failure. Short-term focus bias also contributes to the illusion. Manipulation strategies often produce immediate visible results while creating delayed invisible costs. You see the manipulator get the promotion this month, but you don't see the relationship damage, reputation costs, or psychological consequences that may not become apparent for years. Human psychology is generally better at noticing immediate cause and effect relationships than delayed consequences, which means manipulation success appears more dramatic and manipulation failure appears less connected to manipulative behavior. Attribution errors affect how we interpret manipulator success. When ethical people see manipulators getting ahead, they often attribute this success to the manipulation itself rather than to other factors like luck, timing, institutional dysfunction, or temporary exploitation of system vulnerabilities. This creates the false impression that manipulation is a reliably successful strategy rather than a strategy that occasionally produces short-term gains while creating long-term costs that are less visible. Confirmation bias makes people more likely to notice events that confirm their existing beliefs about how the world works. If you believe that bad people always win, you'll pay more attention to examples of manipulator success while discounting examples of manipulator failure or ethical person success. This selective attention reinforces the illusion that manipulation is more effective than it actually is, while ethical strategies are less effective than they actually are. System-level factors also contribute to manipulation's apparent success. Some organizations, cultures, or social contexts have structures that temporarily reward manipulative behavior while punishing ethical behavior. In these contexts, manipulation may actually be more successful in the short term, but these system-level advantages for manipulation are typically unstable and unsustainable. Organizations that reward manipulation often experience declining performance, increased turnover, and eventual structural collapse. Cultures that celebrate manipulation often face social trust breakdowns that undermine collective prosperity. Understanding why manipulation appears successful helps explain why ethical people often feel discouraged about their strategies and tempted to adopt manipulative approaches themselves. But this understanding also reveals why the appearance of manipulation success is misleading and why ethical strategies typically prove superior in longer timeframes and broader contexts. The hidden costs of manipulation. While manipulative strategies can produce short-term advantages, they also create hidden costs that accumulate over time and eventually undermine the apparent success that manipulation initially provides. Cognitive load costs arise from the mental effort required to maintain deceptive relationships and remember complex webs of lies. Manipulation requires constant vigilance about what you've told different people, which stories need to remain consistent, and which relationships need to be kept separate to prevent contradictions from being discovered. This cognitive burden becomes increasingly exhausting as manipulative relationships multiply and deceptions become more elaborate. Brain imaging studies show that chronic manipulators often experience stress responses similar to those seen in people with anxiety disorders, suggesting that manipulation success comes at significant psychological expense. Relationship authenticity costs emerge because manipulation prevents genuine intimacy and connection. Even when manipulators successfully control others' behavior, they rarely experience the emotional satisfaction that comes from being truly known and appreciated for who they are. Manipulative relationships are fundamentally performance-based rather than authenticity-based, which means the manipulator must constantly maintain their false persona to preserve the relationship benefits. This prevents access to the psychological rewards of genuine acceptance and unconditional positive regard. Identity fragmentation costs develop when manipulators become so skilled at presenting different personas to different people that they lose touch with their authentic selves. The constant shape-shifting required for manipulation can create what psychologists call identity diffusion, uncertainty about core values, preferences, and personality traits. Many chronic manipulators report feeling empty or confused about who they really are, underneath their various performances. The psychological energy devoted to managing external impressions often comes at the expense of internal self-development and authentic identity formation. Trust erosion costs accumulate as manipulative behavior is discovered or suspected by others. Even successful manipulation often leaves subtle evidence that creates doubt about the manipulator's reliability and authenticity. Over time, these doubts can undermine relationships and professional opportunities. The reputation costs of discovered manipulation are typically much greater than the benefits gained from successful manipulation. When manipulation is exposed, it often destroys not just current relationships, but also makes future relationship formation more difficult, as word spreads about the person's untrustworthiness. Escalation costs emerge because manipulation strategies often require increasing investment to maintain effectiveness. As people become aware of manipulative patterns or develop immunity to specific strategies, manipulators must use more extreme or elaborate tactics to achieve the same results. This escalation dynamic often leads manipulators into behavioral territory that carries significant legal, social, or psychological risks. What begins as minor impression management can escalate into serious deception, fraud, or abuse that creates devastating consequences. Moral injury costs affect even manipulators who don't initially experience guilt or empathy. Research suggests that engaging in behavior that violates moral norms, even when those norms aren't strongly felt, can create psychological trauma that manifests as depression, anxiety, or self-destructive behavior. Many successful manipulators eventually experience what therapists call moral injury, psychological damage from participating in actions that violate their deeper values or harm others. This injury can create mental health problems that undermine the benefits gained through manipulation. Understanding these hidden costs explains why manipulation success is typically temporary and why many manipulators eventually face consequences that exceed their short-term gains. The apparent advantage of manipulation often disappears when these hidden costs are factored into long-term cost-benefit analysis. Why ethical people feel like they're losing. The frustration that ethical people feel when watching manipulators succeed isn't just about fairness. It's about fundamental differences in how success is measured. Timeframes are evaluated, and progress is recognized. Different success metrics create much of the confusion about who's actually winning. Manipulators typically optimize for immediate visible rewards like money, status symbols, or social approval. Ethical people often optimize for long-term, less visible rewards like integrity, meaningful relationships, or personal growth. When you measure success using manipulator metrics, immediate material gains, and social status, ethical strategies often appear less effective. But when you measure success using ethical metrics, authenticity, trust, and sustainable satisfaction, manipulative strategies often appear less effective. This difference in success metrics means that ethical people and manipulators are essentially playing different games while appearing to compete in the same arena. The ethical person who prioritizes honesty over advancement may seem to be losing to the manipulator who prioritizes advancement over honesty, but they're actually pursuing fundamentally different definitions of winning. Different timeframes also affect perceptions of relative success. Manipulators often think in terms of weeks, months, or years, while ethical strategies often require decades to fully demonstrate their superiority. The compound benefits of trustworthiness, authenticity, and integrity accrue slowly but persistently over long periods. This temporal difference means that manipulator success often peaks early in careers or relationships, while ethical person success often peaks later. The 30-year-old manipulator may outperform the 30-year-old ethical person, but the 50-year-old comparison may show the opposite pattern. Visibility bias makes manipulator success more noticeable than ethical person success. Manipulative achievements often involve taking credit, self-promotion, and dramatic victories that attract attention. Ethical achievements often involve quiet contribution, collaborative success, and gradual relationship building that receives less recognition. The ethical person who slowly builds a reputation for reliability and wisdom may have more actual influence than the manipulator who dramatically self-promotes, but the manipulator's influence is more visible and thus appears more significant. System mismatch occurs when ethical people operate within systems that were designed to reward different behaviors. Some organizations, cultures, or social contexts have structures that temporarily favor manipulation over ethics, creating environments where ethical strategies are genuinely disadvantaged. But these system mismatches are typically temporary and unsustainable. Organizations that reward manipulation often experience declining performance and eventual restructuring. Cultures that celebrate deception often face trust crises that force realignment toward more ethical norms. Imposter syndrome affects many ethical people who assume that others' apparent success must be based on legitimate superiority rather than manipulative strategies. When ethical people see manipulators getting ahead, they often assume they themselves must be doing something wrong, rather than recognizing that different strategies are being employed. This self-doubt can lead ethical people to abandon strategies that would be more effective in the long term in favor of strategies that appear more effective in the short term, but are ultimately less sustainable. Understanding these perceptual biases helps ethical people maintain confidence in their approach, while recognizing that apparent manipulator success is often less substantial and less sustainable than it appears. The evolutionary psychology of manipulation. Understanding why manipulative strategies exist at all requires examining their evolutionary origins and the environmental conditions that would have made deception adaptive for human survival and reproduction. Resource competition in ancestral environments would have created situations where deception provided survival advantages. When resources were scarce and competition was intense, individuals who could trick others into sharing resources or avoid sharing their own resources would have been more likely to survive and reproduce. This evolutionary heritage explains why manipulative capabilities exist in human psychology and why they can feel natural to some individuals. The psychological mechanisms that enable manipulation evolved because they provided fitness advantages in specific environmental contexts. social coalition building in small groups would have required sophisticated understanding of others' motivations, desires, and vulnerabilities. Individuals who could accurately assess and influence others' behavior would have been more successful in forming beneficial alliances and avoiding harmful conflicts. These same psychological capabilities that enabled successful social navigation in ancestral environments can be repurposed for manipulative strategies in modern environments, explaining why manipulators often excel at reading social dynamics and building strategic relationships. Mating competition would have created evolutionary pressures for deceptive display strategies. Individuals who could present themselves as more attractive, resourceful, or committed than they actually were would have had advantages in accessing desirable mates and reproductive opportunities. Modern romantic manipulation often employs strategies that would have been adaptive in ancestral mating contexts, exaggerating resources, faking commitment, or creating artificial scarcity to increase desirability. These strategies can be effective because they exploit psychological mechanisms that evolved to assess mate quality. Status competition within social hierarchies would have favored individuals who could manage their reputation and others' perceptions of their capabilities. The ability to take credit for successes while avoiding blame for failures would have provided advantages in climbing social hierarchies that controlled resource access. Contemporary workplace manipulation often employs strategies derived from these ancestral status competition dynamics: impression management, credit stealing, and blame avoidance that help individuals rise in organizational hierarchies. But here's the crucial insight. The environmental conditions that made manipulation adaptive in ancestral contexts are fundamentally different from the environmental conditions that exist in modern contexts. Reputation systems in modern societies are more persistent and far-reaching than in ancestral environments. Ancient manipulators could potentially escape the consequences of discovered deception by moving to different social groups. Modern manipulators face digital reputation systems, background checks, and interconnected social networks that make escape from manipulation consequences much more difficult. Institutional accountability in modern societies provides formal mechanisms for detecting and punishing deceptive behavior that didn't exist in ancestral environments. Legal systems, professional licensing, and organizational oversight create consequences for manipulation that would have been impossible to enforce in small-scale societies. Cooperative complexity in modern societies requires trust and authenticity at scales that make manipulation counterproductive. While ancient manipulation might have involved deceiving 10-20 people in a single social group, modern success often requires maintaining trustworthiness with hundreds or thousands of individuals across multiple interconnected systems. This evolutionary analysis explains why manipulative strategies can feel intuitive and sometimes produce short-term success. They're utilizing psychological mechanisms that were adaptive in different environmental contexts. But it also explains why these strategies are ultimately maladaptive in modern contexts that require different capabilities for sustained success. Building immunity to manipulation. Understanding how manipulation works provides the foundation for developing psychological and social immunity that protects you from manipulative strategies while allowing you to maintain your ethical approach to relationships and success. Pattern recognition training involves learning to identify the early warning signs of manipulative behavior before you become emotionally or practically invested in relationships with manipulators. Most manipulation follows predictable patterns that become visible once you know what to look for. Love bombing in romantic contexts, excessive flattery in professional contexts, and sob stories that create immediate intimacy in social contexts are all early indicators of potential manipulation. Learning to recognize these patterns allows you to adjust your boundaries and expectations before manipulation can become effective. Emotional regulation skills protect you from the emotional triggers that manipulators use to override your logical decision-making. When you can remain calm during guilt trips, pressure tactics, or emotional emergencies, you can evaluate situations rationally rather than reacting from triggered emotional states. Mindfulness practices, cognitive behavioral techniques, and emotional awareness training all help develop the psychological stability that makes emotional manipulation ineffective. When your emotional responses are under your conscious control, manipulators lose their primary tool for influencing your behavior. Boundary enforcement capabilities allow you to maintain your standards and limits even when manipulators use relationship pressure, social expectations, or emotional manipulation to push for exceptions. Clear, consistent boundaries make manipulation attempts more obvious and less successful. This requires developing comfort with other people's disappointment, anger, or rejection when you refuse to comply with unreasonable requests. Many manipulation attempts succeed because people fear the social or emotional consequences of saying no to inappropriate demands. Information verification habits protect you from manipulation that relies on false or misleading information. Developing reflexive tendencies to fact-check claims, seek multiple perspectives, and verify credentials helps prevent manipulation that depends on information asymmetry or false expertise. This is particularly important in professional contexts, where manipulators often exaggerate their qualifications, experience, or achievements to gain trust and influence. Independent verification of important claims protects you from decisions based on false information. Support network development provides external perspectives that can help you recognize manipulation when you're too close to the situation to see it clearly. Trusted friends, family members, or colleagues can often spot manipulative behavior that you might miss due to emotional involvement or information manipulation. Building relationships with people who prioritize your well-being over social harmony creates access to honest feedback about relationships and situations that might involve manipulation. These support networks also provide emotional and practical resources that reduce your vulnerability to manipulation that exploits neediness or isolation. Self-worth independence reduces your vulnerability to manipulation that exploits insecurity, approval-seeking, or self-doubt. When your sense of worth comes from internal sources rather than external validation, you become less susceptible to flattery, criticism, or social pressure that manipulators use for control. This requires developing authentic self-knowledge, pursuing meaningful goals that align with your values, and building competence in areas that matter to you independent of others' opinions or approval. Building manipulation immunity doesn't require becoming suspicious or cynical about all relationships. It requires developing sophisticated social intelligence that allows you to distinguish between authentic connection and manipulative performance, while maintaining openness to genuine relationships. Ethical strategies that actually win the most effective response to living in a world where manipulation seems to succeed isn't to become manipulative yourself. It's to develop ethical strategies that provide sustainable advantages without the hidden costs and eventual failure patterns that characterize manipulative approaches. Authentic relationship building creates long-term advantages that manipulation cannot replicate. When people trust you to be honest, reliable, and genuinely interested in mutual benefit, they become willing to collaborate, share opportunities, and provide support in ways that benefit everyone involved. Authentic relationships compound over time because trust builds on trust, and reputation for integrity creates access to higher quality opportunities and partnerships. While manipulators burn through relationships and must constantly find new people to exploit, ethical relationship builders develop deeper connections that provide increasing benefits over time. Value creation focus, rather than value extraction, creates sustainable success patterns that benefit both you and others. When your professional and personal strategies center on contributing genuine value to others' lives and goals, you become someone that others want to work with, support, and promote. This approach creates what economists call positive sum outcomes, where your success enhances rather than diminishes others' success. Value creators become magnets for opportunities, resources, and collaboration because working with them benefits everyone involved. Competence development provides advantages that manipulation cannot fake or steal. When you develop genuine expertise, skills, and capabilities that solve real problems for real people, you become valuable in ways that don't depend on deception or emotional manipulation. Competence-based success is also more psychologically satisfying than manipulation-based success because it provides authentic self-efficacy and pride in accomplishment. The confidence that comes from genuine capability is more stable and sustainable than the false confidence that comes from successful manipulation. Reputation investment creates long-term strategic advantages through consistent demonstration of integrity, reliability, and ethical behavior. While manipulators must constantly manage their image and hide their true behaviors, ethical people can invest in building reputations that accurately reflect their character and capabilities. Reputation investment requires patience because the benefits accrue slowly, but it eventually creates access to opportunities, partnerships, and leadership roles that are unavailable to people with questionable reputations. High-integrity reputations also provide protection during difficult times when people need to choose whom to trust and support. System building, rather than system exploitation, creates lasting influence and impact. Instead of taking advantage of organizational or social system weaknesses, ethical strategies often involve improving systems to work better for everyone involved. System builders become valuable to organizations and communities because they enhance overall functioning rather than extracting personal benefit at collective expense. This approach often leads to leadership opportunities and legacy impact that provides meaning and satisfaction beyond personal gain. Collaborative advantage emerges when you consistently approach relationships and opportunities from a collaborative rather than competitive mindset. Instead of trying to win at others' expense, you look for ways to create wins for everyone involved. This approach attracts high-quality partners and opportunities because people prefer working with collaborators rather than competitors. Collaborative success also tends to be more sustainable because it doesn't create enemies or resentment that can undermine future opportunities. The key insight is that ethical strategies often outperform manipulative strategies when evaluated over longer timeframes and broader success metrics. While manipulation may provide short-term tactical advantages, ethical approaches typically provide superior strategic advantages that compound over time. The long-term failure of manipulation. Despite appearances, manipulation is a fundamentally unsustainable strategy that contains the seeds of its own destruction. Understanding why manipulation ultimately fails helps explain why ethical approaches, while sometimes slower to show results, prove superior over time. Reputation destruction is perhaps the most inevitable consequence of manipulative behavior. Modern interconnected societies make it increasingly difficult to escape the consequences of discovered manipulation. Digital footprints, professional networks, and social media create permanent records that make reputation rehabilitation extremely difficult. When manipulation is discovered, and it usually is eventually, the reputation damage typically exceeds the benefits gained through the manipulative behavior. A manipulator might gain a promotion through deception, but lose multiple future opportunities when the deception is revealed. Relationship deterioration occurs because manipulation prevents the development of genuine trust and intimacy that sustain long-term relationships. Manipulative relationships are inherently unstable because they depend on one person's ignorance of the other person's true motivations and character. Even when manipulation isn't consciously detected, people often develop subconscious awareness that something feels off about the relationship. This intuitive distrust gradually undermines the relationship's emotional foundation and leads to decreased investment, reduced intimacy, or eventual termination. Skill atrophy affects manipulators who rely on deceptive strategies rather than developing genuine capabilities. When your success depends on managing others' perceptions rather than creating actual value, you don't develop the competencies that sustain long-term success. Manipulators often find themselves increasingly dependent on manipulation as their primary success strategy because they haven't invested in developing authentic skills and capabilities. This creates vulnerability when manipulation becomes less effective or when they encounter situations that require genuine competence. Escalation pressure forces manipulators to use increasingly extreme strategies to maintain effectiveness. As people become aware of manipulative patterns or develop immunity to specific tactics, manipulators must escalate to more elaborate, risky, or harmful approaches. This escalation dynamic often leads manipulators into legal, professional, or social territory that carries severe consequences. What might begin as minor impression management can escalate into fraud, abuse, or other behaviors that create devastating personal and professional consequences. Psychological deterioration affects many chronic manipulators who experience increasing internal conflict, identity confusion, and mental health problems as the costs of maintaining manipulative lifestyles accumulate over time. Research suggests that engaging in frequent deceptive behavior creates psychological stress even for people who don't initially experience guilt or empathy. The cognitive load, social isolation, and moral injury associated with manipulation can lead to depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems that undermine overall life satisfaction. System adaptation occurs as organizations, communities, and institutions develop better detection and prevention methods for manipulative behavior. As awareness of manipulation tactics increases, systems evolve to become more resistant to these strategies. Modern organizations increasingly use background checks, reference verification, and behavioral assessment tools that make manipulation more difficult and less successful. Social media and online reputation systems also create transparency that exposes manipulative behavior more quickly than in previous generations. Energy depletion affects manipulators who must constantly maintain elaborate facades, manage complex deceptions, and monitor multiple relationships for signs of discovered manipulation. This psychological effort becomes increasingly exhausting over time. Many successful manipulators eventually report feeling burned out from the constant vigilance required to maintain their manipulative lifestyle. The energy required to sustain deception often exceeds the energy that would be required to achieve similar results through ethical means. Understanding these failure patterns explains why manipulation success is typically temporary, and why most manipulators eventually face consequences that exceed their short-term gains. The apparent advantage of manipulation disappears when these inevitable failure patterns are factored into long-term analysis. Building ethical power and influence. The alternative to manipulation isn't powerlessness. It's developing forms of influence and success that don't depend on deception, exploitation, or harm to others. Ethical power often proves more sustainable and satisfying than manipulative power, while avoiding the hidden costs and eventual failure patterns that characterize deceptive strategies. Expertise-based influence comes from developing genuine knowledge, skills, and capabilities that solve real problems for other people. When you become someone others rely on for valuable insights, creative solutions, or essential expertise, you gain influence that doesn't depend on deception or emotional manipulation. Expertise-based influence grows stronger over time as your reputation for competence spreads and your skills continue developing. Unlike manipulation-based influence, which requires constant maintenance and risks discovery, expertise-based influence becomes more solid and reliable as it matures. Value creation leadership emerges when you consistently find ways to improve situations, solve problems, and create benefits for others while pursuing your own goals. This approach to leadership attracts followers because people genuinely benefit from your success rather than suffering from it. Value creation leaders often find that others actively support their advancement because they understand that the leader's success enhances rather than threatens their own opportunities. This creates sustainable influence that doesn't require manipulation or coercion to maintain. Trust-based networks develop when you consistently demonstrate reliability, honesty, and genuine concern for others' welfare in your professional and personal relationships. Trust-based networks provide access to opportunities, resources, and collaboration that manipulation-based relationships cannot sustain. Trust networks also provide resilience during difficult times because people who trust you are more likely to offer support, forgiveness, and second chances when you face challenges or make mistakes. Manipulative relationships typically disappear during difficult times because they were based on benefit rather than genuine connection. Authenticity magnetism attracts high-quality relationships and opportunities because authenticity is increasingly rare and valuable in environments where manipulation and performance are common. People are drawn to authentic individuals because they provide relief from the exhausting social performance that characterizes many modern interactions. Authentic people often find that they effortlessly attract others who value genuineness and depth in relationships. This natural selection process tends to surround authentic people with others who share similar values and relationship styles, creating mutually supportive communities. System improvement focus creates lasting influence by working to enhance the organizations, communities, and social structures you participate in, rather than exploiting their weaknesses for personal advantage. System improvers become valued because they make everything work better for everyone involved. This approach often leads to leadership opportunities and legacy impact because people recognize system improvers as contributors to collective welfare rather than extractors of personal benefit. System improvement work also provides deep meaning and satisfaction that purely self-serving success cannot match. Collaborative multiplication occurs when you consistently approach opportunities and challenges with the mindset of creating wins for everyone involved, rather than trying to win at others' expense. Collaborative approaches often create outcomes that exceed what any individual could achieve alone. Collaborative multipliers become magnets for high-quality partnerships because they have track records of creating mutual benefit in their relationships and projects. This approach also builds skills in cooperation, communication, and creative problem-solving that enhance effectiveness across all areas of life. The key insight is that ethical power and influence often prove more effective than manipulative alternatives when evaluated over sufficient timeframes and comprehensive success metrics. While ethical approaches may develop more slowly, they typically create more sustainable, satisfying, and significant impact than manipulative strategies. The ultimate reality about winning. The deepest truth about why manipulators seem to win is that they're playing a different game with different rules, different scorekeeping, and different definitions of victory. Understanding this distinction reveals why ethical people often feel like they're losing when they're actually winning according to more meaningful and sustainable criteria. Different game entirely becomes apparent when you recognize that manipulators and ethical people are optimizing for fundamentally different outcomes. Manipulators typically optimize for immediate acquisition, money, status, control, or approval that can be obtained quickly through strategic behavior. Ethical people typically optimize for longer-term integration, meaningful relationships, authentic achievement, personal growth, and contribution that develops slowly through consistent behavior aligned with deep values. These different optimization strategies make direct comparison misleading because they're pursuing fundamentally different types of success, using fundamentally different methods with fundamentally different time frames. Quality versus quantity distinctions affect how success is measured and evaluated. Manipulators often achieve success that appears impressive in quantity. More money, more relationships, more status symbols, more social media followers, but lacks quality in terms of depth, sustainability, or personal satisfaction. Ethical success often appears less impressive in quantity, but provides superior quality in terms of meaningful relationships, authentic achievement, and personal fulfillment. The difference between having many superficial relationships and having few deep relationships illustrates this quality-quantity distinction. Internal versus external validation creates different psychological experiences of success, even when external achievements appear insimilar. Manipulative success often depends on external validation and recognition, which makes it vulnerable to changes in others' opinions or social circumstances. Ethical success often includes significant internal validation from living according to personal values and principles, which provides psychological resilience and satisfaction independent of external recognition or approval. Legacy and impact considerations reveal dramatic differences in the long-term consequences of manipulative versus ethical approaches to success. Manipulative success often creates negative externalities, harm to others, damage to systems, or cultural degradation that undermines collective welfare. Ethical success often creates positive externalities, benefits to others, improvements to systems, or cultural enhancement that contributes to collective flourishing. The legacy impact of ethical success typically exceeds the legacy impact of manipulative success when evaluated over generational timeframes. Meaning and fulfillment factors affect the subjective experience of success regardless of external achievements. Research consistently shows that people who achieve success through manipulation often report feeling empty, anxious, or depressed despite their apparent victories. Ethical people who achieve success through value-aligned behavior often report high levels of satisfaction, meaning, and psychological well-being, even when their external achievements appear more modest than those of manipulators. Contribution to human flourishing provides the ultimate criterion for evaluating different approaches to success. Manipulative strategies typically extract value from social systems while contributing little to collective welfare. Ethical strategies typically contribute value to social systems while creating personal success. From this perspective, ethical people aren't losing to manipulators. They're participating in a different form of competition with different goals, different methods, and different criteria for determining who actually wins. The illusion that manipulators always win disappears when you realize that they're winning at a game you don't actually want to play, using methods you don't actually want to use, achieving outcomes that wouldn't actually satisfy you, even if you could achieve them through manipulation. True winning for most people who consider themselves ethical involves achieving success that aligns with their deepest values, contributes to others' welfare, creates lasting positive impact, and provides authentic satisfaction and meaning. Manipulative success rarely achieves any of these outcomes, which means manipulators aren't actually winning according to the criteria that matter to ethical people. Understanding this distinction provides psychological freedom to pursue ethical success strategies without feeling disadvantaged by manipulators' apparent victories. You're not failing at their game, you're succeeding at a different, better game that provides rewards they can't access through their strategies. The ultimate reality is that in the long run, ethical approaches to success typically outperform manipulative approaches across most meaningful metrics, while also providing psychological benefits that manipulation cannot deliver. The appearance that manipulators always win is a short-term illusion that disappears when success is evaluated comprehensively over sufficient timeframes. You don't need to become a manipulator to succeed. You need to become clear about what success actually means to you and pursue it through methods that align with your values and contribute to the kind of world you want to live in. That clarity and alignment represent a form of winning that manipulation can never achieve.